Alright, so if you are new here, you do not know this, but if you consistently watch my videos, then you know that I own a brand, and within that brand, I take photos of people. In this video, I'm going to show you guys some simple ways that I edit my photos that are not too complicated that you guys can use as well to make your photos look better. Now, even though I'm using Photoshop, which is a paid program in this video, you guys can also use different free programs that yield the same results. I will be using two portraits of two different friends of mine whose names are Brianna and Trey. These two people are really good in style and as for what they wear, and you guys can see that, like, these guys know what they're doing with their style. And as the photographer, it is my job to bring out the best kind of color and lighting and things like that bring out the outfits, I guess. Now, if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe. I make content about my freelance gigs, social media topics, filmmaking tips, and photography tips. Right now I'm posting once a week. I might do more, who knows, but yeah, that way you never miss a video. Alright, let's get into it. One of the things that I like to do with my clients is basically let them wear whatever they want and be expressive. And in this case, Brianna and Trey, like I said, they both have great styles. So Brianna chose this color block theme, which is this gray denim jacket, these really popping red jeans, and these Adidas sneakers. And it works really well in this case because the green in her jacket works really good with this green chair, and in that case I decided to edit these, or this particular shot, to match her green. So this is what I ended up with, and this is what I started with. Now let me show you how I got there. In a lot of these apps or softwares that you guys will use, there is the brightness and this general gist of like messing with the lighting of these photos and the saturation and concentration, as well as like the different colors of it, the color balance per se. Yeah, a lot of photographers like to use Lightroom. I mostly just use Photoshop. It's really just your preference. So we start here with the brightness. And this is already kind of exposed pretty well, which I'm glad that I was paying attention to, actually, because sometimes that is not the case. And if you don't use flash and you have low light, well, that can result in some really poor lit photos. So we come here and we drag this, not too much, but we'll go to about 14. Bring up the contrast to about 10. And as you can see, we can go back and see how that affected it. So not too bad. Now this can get a little bit tricky if you really don't know what you're doing here and you're just starting on these kinds of edits, then well, you can just use the master, which is pretty much just this one. And what it is basically doing is just bringing up all of these colors. I usually drag it a bit to the left, somewhere usually between 1.5 and 110, and what that does is it just kind of brings out the harsh shadows that might be present there. Once we are done with that, we can go to our curves. This almost does the same thing. It involves the shadows and the contrast of things. We can see that it really kind of fades it out. So you're messing with the blacks in this case. What I like to do is called an S curve, and that basically makes everything pop a little bit more. So one dot here, and you make an S with it. It doesn't have to be too harsh, because when you make it too harsh, as you can see, well, you'll get many different vibes from it. So if you want to go this route and use the S curve, which I think is one of the best ways to get like a generalization of what people can like, and it makes their skin pop, it makes their clothing pop, and things like that. So it's just a general good approach. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I magically got a haircut between this video. I would suggest that the way to go is just try and have this S curve to bring out the most in your client's skin tones. It's relatively easy to overdo this S curve or like the look of it, so yeah, I would just make sure that it's a subtle S curve, but it's definitely there. So before I go into any more detail about how I edit these photos, I really want to know from you guys. Do you edit your photos? Why or why not? And what program do you use? Do you just use your phone? Or do you use a program like this? Moving on to exposure, and this is basically what you want to do if it is way too bright and you have too many whites and it just looks like, if the photo looks like what you see when you first step outside of your house, it's probably overexposed. However, if you really can't define any skin tones or textures in the photo, it's probably underexposed. Well, either way, I guess. Now in this case, I love how it's exposed. I think that her facial textures of Brianna's face, I think that came out pretty well. But I do like to have more room to work with in color. So in this case, I will actually leave this how it is, because even if I just slightly move it to, let's say, plus 0.33 stops, it actually blows out her sneakers, and you don't want anything blown out in this photo because that just kind of looks weird. You basically want to keep the textures in the photo because, as you can see, like within the bricks and whatnot, the texture is there. And in this case, I really do want to keep those textures there. I don't want her shoe to look like a highlighter. After exposure is properly set, we can go over to saturation, and I personally enjoy bringing out colors that are already there that pop. Not too much because we don't want, again, the highlighter effect that I like to call it. But it seems like an additional 8 points of saturation will do this photo well and bring out the greens and the reds in her clothing and the chair, as well as her jean jacket. And once again, you can see that I am using the master here. You do not have to use all of these different color layers because that can get pretty complicated if you don't really have the eye for what you really want to shoot yet. Moving on to these last two, which is the color balance of what I was talking about earlier with bringing out the different hues, I guess, in the textures and tones of this photo. And the last one that we'll end up using is the channel mixer. These pretty much do exactly the same thing, only the color balance, it's a bit more contrasted, but let me show you guys what I mean. Now there is really no specific way to do this. In this video I'm specifically going for the previous example that I showed you guys, but really you can just mess around with this and find what you prefer and what your client enjoys as well. Again, do not be afraid to mess around with the colors in this because you will figure out that a lot of these colors may or may not look amazing. And again, in this case, I really enjoy bringing out the greens and yellows in the textures of the scenery around her because it matches well with her clothing. Now, in total honesty, I don't know exactly what I did for the previous photo, but this looks pretty damn close to me. And again, you could also go back and see where you started. And finally, we go to our channel mixer, and this is one of my favorites to mess with. For these specific photos, I did shoot RAW, and RAW will give you a lot more metadata. I used to shoot both RAW and JPEG. It's really all about preference. You don't always have to shoot RAW or always have to shoot JPEG, but I personally shoot both. I like having both options. But in this case, it's a lot harder to work with these kinds of mixers if you shoot JPEG because, well, you have less to work with in terms of the amount of information that you have in each photo.
Editing. When you take a photo in the RAW format, it preserves a ton more data than a simple JPEG, which allows you to edit the photo later. Stuff like shadows, highlights, there's a ton of detail retained in them when you shoot in RAW, and you can pull out that detail in post to edit to your liking.
So we will just go here, and as you can see, a little bit goes a very long way. Go to about 8 there. Now we're just messing with the reds in this case. You do have options for the greens and blues. Basically what this is going to do is the contrast. If you think about a color wheel, that's pretty much what you're messing with. You're going to each spectrum of color. Now if this definitely feels like a lot to take in, don't worry about it. There's a lot of numbers and symbols. Now the greens are something that we could really pay attention to again, just because that is a kind of primary color that we are using in this, as well as the reds. So yeah, this is why I really like this channel mixture, because it really helps bring out the color that you might not have known was even there before. But again, it's only there because you're shooting RAW, and if you were shooting JPEG, this would be a lot harder to bring out, and the highlights and such might be harder to work with. Alright, well there you have it. That is our first finished and edited photo that is basically identical to the first one that we started out with. The first one that we started out with actually has a bit more reds in it. At the same time, you won't always nail it the first time. You might have to go back and take out some of the tones and colors of the certain areas of the photo. And in this case, I don't really like how green her face turned out, so we can go back and always change that. Again, a little bit goes a very long way. So I ended up going back to the green output channel and literally just changed it by a couple of points. Either way, back and forth, left or right, negative or positive, find out what you like. And I think it's really important to go based off of your preference because, again, you are the photographer, you're the one taking these photos, and it should be that you are providing the eye for your client. Most of the time, they might not actually know what they want, and that's your job to figure it out for them. And now that I'm looking at both of these side by side, I honestly prefer this second edited one. It's a bit better exposed, and I think the colors blend well this second time around. So that might happen too. But yeah, that makes sense because as time passes by, you learn different things about your edits and find different things that look better to your eye. Okay, now moving on to our final photo. This is with Trey. I really wanted to bring out the lights in this photo because it really reflects with what he wore, and it just pops because it's gold versus, well, these vibrant. It's kind of a very retro feel and abstract feel. This is out of Collegi's actually. The sunset, bro, in the frog costume. Oh, work it, ooh. So what I really wanted to do with this photo is really bring out the leading lines of his lights and have them pop off the outfit on his, well, what he's wearing. The jacket that he wore and the white shirt underneath really helps pop out. So that's one thing that you can do when you are editing your photos, is use the elements around the photo to really bring out the client themselves. So here's what we started out with, and here's what we ended up with. There's not a huge difference. Most of the difference is in the lighting and his facial textures. But I guess in this case, that's the best tip that I can give you, is just use the surrounding elements to really bring out the textures. And if something complements the client in the photo, use that to your advantage. So if you guys can actually tell, this is actually shot in JPEG. So we have less information in this photo, but it really won't matter in this case because of these lights that are helping us light Trey as a subject. If you did not have these lights in this case, it might be a bit harder to bring out the colors, lighting, and textures in the photo. And basically what we're going to do is the same thing we did with Brianna's photo, but the biggest difference will be in the colors, like the color balance and the channel mixer. So about here on 38, I love how it brings out Trey's face. This photo might have been a bit underexposed considering the highlights of the retro LEDs themselves. And again, you can go back and forth and eyeball it. There's really no specific way to do this, and if anyone tells you there's a specific way, they're probably not telling you the truth. So in this case, the master levels of the RGB themselves are going to be really helpful because this photo itself had a bit more harsh shadows in it. So in the usual case, I'd probably have it at 1.05 or 1.10. In this case, I'm actually going to go to 1.15. And if we can go back once more, then we can actually tell that his face was a bit too shadowed in the beginning, and that really helps bring out his face. Especially because he's doing this cool like hat nod thing, and it just works. And what do you guys know? Again, we are doing the S-curve, the trusty S-curve. In this case, it will really help bring out these lights and the reflection of his jacket. One of the things that I should point out is that the differences that these edits will make most of the time won't be dramatic differences, but that's the point. That is a good thing, and that means that you are getting your eyeball to the better, I guess, preference of what you want to take a photo of and the style that you're looking for. When you can get to the point of not doing too much of the edit in Photoshop and just having the photo itself just like that, well, that just means that you are getting better and developing your eyes and skill sets. And again, you can see that this S-curve is not dramatic, it is only subtle. But if we can go dramatic, it really brings out the reds and everything. And we can go up, and again, you can see how it fades him out. In this case, we don't want it to fade. We really want to help him pop and be the character that he portrays in this photo. The ISO is what will really help bring out any lights that you take photos with or of. And if that is underexposed, bringing out the exposure will sometimes bring out those lights, but it will blow something else out, which is those texts and the actual signs themselves, if there's any signs. And in this case, we actually want to keep those texts and the menu itself because it just adds that vintage vibe. So actually, since this was shot in JPEG, I think I'm going to lower the exposure, that way I can keep the writing on this menu. But instead, I'm going to bring the brightness up just a little bit. So prime example of how it is just a little bit harder to bring out certain highlights and textures in a photo if it is not shot in RAW. Now, for this case, there's a lot of color in this picture, and we really want to help make that pop. So we can bring the saturation up just a bit, but we don't want to make Trey's face red. We want to keep his tones natural looking. So I think about +3 will really help make that pop a little bit more, but we'll also keep it looking natural enough. Now again, I just like the preference of candid and the textures and tones of people's facial textures in that case, but it's your preference. So yeah guys, that is how I edit my photos. I really like to help just bring out the expression of my clients. If you have a more stylized manner of editing these, or if you don't edit yours at all, that is totally fine. Again, this is all about having fun and finding the style that best suits your style and your client's style. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, gotten some value out of this. Make sure to like this video if you have enjoyed, and leave that comment down below. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good day or night. Peace. Trey, how do you think this shoot went today?
It went mighty swell. Mighty swell.
Glad you think so. I like the dope outfit.
We have some mad fire. Like I don't know if they're ready.
He has some mad fire,
well, bro. Both of us. I don't know if they're ready, man.
Sweet.
But hell yeah.